And I would love to show it to you, not only because it's cute, but also because it's incredibly functional. Really, absolutely a win for me in terms of combining usefulness with looking super cute. And yes, you heard right, it is an IKEA unit, trying to strike a balance between being cluttered and also like needing spaces to put things. I really have taken this all the way up to the ceiling. It's one of like the biggest game changers in terms of like changing my habits and making my sewing a little bit more organized and smooth and clean up and that much more efficient. Can it be both useful and pretty at the same time? And the answer is quite frequently yes. Yes, it can. Hello friends, and welcome back to my studio. For those of you who have been following along on the channel for a while, you will probably recognize that I am back in my normal sewing space after nearly 3 months of being gone. If you followed along with my Vlogmas series, you'll know that I was traveling for all of November and December on contract in the US, and then in January I was in Budapest. I'm finally back in town, and for me personally, coming back from a contract is the best time for me to clean, purge, donate, reorganize. There's just nothing like having been gone to give a little perspective on what is working, what isn't working, to inspire a little bit of that spring cleaning that everybody else who's not living in a frigid hellscape of winter might be starting to feel right about now. So I thought, now that my space is clean, I took all day yesterday to kind of go through and organize it. I thought let's do a fun little studio tour and take a look at some of my favorite spaces in here, some of my storage options, what is working, what isn't working, things I would change, things I absolutely love and would not change. So without further ado, let's jump in and look at my space. So for those of you who might be new here, I thought let's just give a quick overview of the room. Walking into it, the main element is of course the sewing table that takes up most of the space. Then on the back wall, we've got this lovely display here, which is done by myself and mostly recycled. Then we've got another storage unit off to the side. And then over here, the side that we don't see very often on camera, we're gonna come around to a part of the room that you guys never get to see because it's on the same wall as the windows, and every time I try to film anything over here, the lighting is just atrocious. We're gonna tough it out because this is a very cute corner. I look at it every day and I would love to show it to you, not only because it's cute, but also because it's incredibly functional and it has a lot of items that people in the comments for my table video said, but it would be really nice to have this X, Y, and Z. Well, they're almost all of them over here. So let's turn you around and show you what I've got going on. Really quick though, before we get too far into looking at everything I've got in my sewing space, I do want to do a quick little disclaimer, and that is simply that the vast majority of sewing things that I have in this space are thrifted and accumulated over years and years. So I just want to be clear about that because I do sometimes feel like these studio tours can kind of come off with that haul vibe, and that's just very much not what I want to be giving off. If you've been here for a while, you know that I'm all about like making sewing accessible and feel achievable, and also just like we don't need to buy more things. Can we try and just use what we have, make do, and if you need something, let's see if we can find it secondhand when possible. Just wanted to make sure that that was clear because I do have, especially as I have cleaned everything up in the last day and a half, I do have a lot of stuff, and most of it is absolutely not necessary to do good sewing. So please don't feel as you watch this video like you need to have everything in your studio that I have in mine, or that you need to get it all instantly. With that out of the way and off my conscience, back to the tour. So here is my pegboard wall, and it is one of my favorite little nooks of my sewing space because it is both incredibly cute and incredibly functional. And I do show the making of this briefly in the video that I released right before I released the table video, and that is just kind of redoing the rest of my sewing space. You can see how I made the shelves that are back against the wall, the ones that feature in the background of almost all of my videos. You can see how I made this. It was honestly a super fun process, just kind of designing this room how I liked it, and I'm really happy with the way it turned out. But let's talk about the pegboard wall. So basically, here's the thing. I love the functionality of pegboard walls and I hate how they look. I think they just are so ugly and utilitarian, and they can work really well in some settings, like maybe a carpenter's shop, but for a sewing space that I want to be on camera and just cute and cozy and aesthetic, it was not the look I was going for. So what I decided to do, kind of on a whim, wasn't sure if it was going to work, but I purchased some really cute wallpaper off of Spoonflower. Then I laid it on there, and what I actually did was, before I put the wallpaper on, I hung the pegboard up, just the plain brown pegboard, and I tried out the placement. So I left it there for almost a week, just playing with where things were sitting, what was the ideal arrangement, what tools was I wanting to store on that pegboard there. And once I was satisfied with an arrangement that I thought was going to be pretty permanent, then I covered it with wallpaper, and instead of cutting out all of the circles for the pegboard in the wallpaper, instead I just would cut a little X with my X-Acto blade everywhere that I wanted one of the supports to poke through to the other side, and that's worked super well. For the most part, I haven't moved anything around, but there were a couple holes that did get moved around, and where they had been cut, it basically is invisible because the wallpaper just kind of naturally closes back up and you can't really see that there was ever something sitting in that hole. So really, absolutely a win for me in terms of combining usefulness with looking super cute. So it's got all of my most used items, so things like marking tools, pens, chalk, X-Acto blades. It's got all of my scissors, from fabric scissors to leather scissors to regular paper scissors, a wide assortment of rulers, and then also it does double to hold back my curtains, which was unanticipated and a situation I probably should remedy with an actual proper curtain holder at some point. But you know what? It's working for now. It's worked for a year and a half, so why change it? And then if we look at this shelf up here sitting on top of the shelf, we've got these two really cute little wicker baskets, again, secondhand, and then I made some lining for them out of this really cute fabric. It's got all these owls. Wait, here's the front. Yeah, the owls are facing the right way in the front. So these hold my items that are used very frequently, but not quite as frequently as the stuff on the main pegboard. So we've got things like my tailoring ham and sausage, shameless plug. I do sell these. I use them all the time, and it's really easy to just reach up and grab them. Obviously, these do not hang very well on a pegboard wall. So I've got those. Got my X-Acto blades. I use these almost on a daily basis. Replacement blades for my rotary cutter. My rotary cutter does live over here. I don't use this like every day, but when I use it, I want it to be really easy to grab. So it just lives there with all my other marking tools. And then the blades, backup scissors. I talk about the scissors and the scissor haul that I unexpectedly had in the short little video about how I got a free sewing machine. More on that later. These are all what's living up here. And they're super, super useful. Like I find them very easy to reach and access, pull them down, little extra storage in here. This shelf is a very small shelf. It's super shallow. It's just barely deep enough to hold those wicker baskets, but that's all I need it for. I don't want it taking up a bunch of space and coming into my room. So there's that. Then underneath it here, we've got my sewing machine. Now this is where it lives when I'm not using it. Honestly, most of the time it's living on the main sewing table because I'm sewing, but when I'm not using it, it lives here, just kind of sits and is aesthetic. And then off to the side, I've got, you know, some overflow patterns. This is where I keep my cute vintage patterns, just because I don't have anywhere else to access them, and it seemed like a shame to let the rest of the sewing table surface go to waste. Trying to strike a balance between being cluttered and also like needing spaces to put things. It's a constant struggle in this space, what can I say? Then if we look under the table, we've just got some extra fabric, my serger threads, and the foot pedal. We have a spare sewing machine, which should be in working order, and then we've got this sewing machine, which is not in working order and needs to be repaired, and I got it for $15 and maybe got in a little bit deeper than I had anticipated, but oh well. One just tends to collect sewing machines as one sews, which is exactly the story behind this. Now, I'm not gonna spend too much time talking about that sewing machine because I do have an entire video on the channel. It's actually a really fun video. I think it's only like 6 or 8 minutes long, but basically I came across that in the streets of Montreal and it had a big sign on it saying it was to give away, and it ended up being the exact same model sewing machine that I grew up using. It was an heirloom. It was my great grandma's. So it was super fun to find the same exact machine for free. So I did haul it back to Montreal. Trust me, if you want more information, it's a super fun short little video. I was so excited to get that, to find it. It blew my mind. People occasionally stumble across that video and ask me, well, have you got it up and working? Is it in a different table? Like, what's going on with it? So the update is I have done absolutely nothing with it since last summer. The table it came with is both damaged and kind of a little bit musty. So I looked at it, it's not worth salvaging, it's not good quality wood, and it's all warped and kind of beyond hope. Like, I could salvage it, but it just wouldn't be worth my time. So I'm probably going to try and move it into a different table at some point, potentially even actually the table that I just showed you. We are just gonna move on to the next part of the room. On the ground here, because I wanted to show you a couple things down in this corner a bit lower, and one of them is, as we probably all know by now, thanks to my patchwork video, this drawer is where I toss all of my offcuts. They just go to live in here. It is about to overflow, so I'm either gonna have to find another drawer or give up some of my scraps or incorporate them into my community patchwork project. But also, this little corner here is actually where I store all of my crafting cardboard. So it just lives in this space between the wall. And so now, if I need a piece of cardboard, I just reach in and grab it out. But otherwise it remains absolutely invisible, which again, we love that. Hide the ugly stuff out of the way. Now, the main element in this sewing room, and by far the superstar of the space, is this absolutely massive sewing table that I've got behind me, and that would be the logical place to start most studio tours. However, I'm actually going to make that a whole separate video because there are just so many fun features and surprise elements of this table, so much storage jammed into such a little space, that is going to be next week's video. So first of all, if you're not subscribed, be sure you are so that you get notified when that video comes out. And otherwise, if you haven't seen the video about making it, go check it out. It is a super fun make. This table was made entirely by me, and it is almost entirely recycled materials. Go check that out. You will learn about some of the fun features of this table if you can't wait until next week. But if you did see that video, then it will also be enjoyable for you because I'm gonna go through what is working for me, what isn't working as well, what features I absolutely love, what features I just don't really use in the end. So I think it's gonna be a really fun video. And for now though, I'm just going to roll this table out of here, leave us a little bit more space to talk about some of the other elements in the room. All right, so now that the table is out of the way, we can get a much better look at this stunning IKEA unit behind me. And yes, you heard right, it is an IKEA unit. It's just a very highly customized and decorated IKEA expedite unit because it's just your classic 2x4 cubby unit. Phil and I made this several years ago. It was one of our first big projects together, and it was kind of marked the start of my quest to make my furniture both utilitarian and aesthetic. I would like to marry the two as much as possible. And so far, it's been working really well for me. And I do have about 4 of the cubbies in here have sewing stuff. There's a couple that hold ongoing projects. There's one that holds a bunch of miscellaneous notions, but like things pulled off of items I found on the street. So lots of buckles, straps, that sort of thing. The addition of the drawers on top also very useful for me in terms of this room needs to pull double duty, and I'm able to keep like paperwork, office supplies, that kind of stuff can live up there. Also, some of that lives in the top cubbies. That's where I also have things like there's a cubby purely of electronics, one purely of tax paperwork and boring stuff like that. So I think that this is kind of very emblematic of the way that I like my furniture to function. Can it be both useful and pretty at the same time? And the answer is quite frequently yes. Yes, it can. Then if we come up top here, this is not particularly part of this unit, but it does often live here when it's not on my sewing table, and that is this absolutely fun, adorable little tray. You'll see it in some shots throughout my videos, and it's not just there for aesthetics. I really do use it. This is how I keep my notions for my current project organized. And so this is where things that I use in basically every project tend to live. So I always have a seam ripper on here, unfortunately. I always have a ruler. I've got my knitting needle for turning out, you know, corners, pointy corners. There's a thimble. This is where my like little buttons and stuff live. So this tray, I find it super useful as I'm doing a project because I just have developed this reflex that as I'm using something, whether it's a pair of scissors, a piece of chalk, anything like that, pins, when I'm done using it, I set it down in the tray, and that kind of keeps it all contained. It also means that when I go to clear off my sewing table, if I need to lay out a wide stretch of fabric or something on there, or if I need to clean it up for the day and turn it into like a work desk for a computer and stuff, it's as easy as just moving the tray around, and that has been a game changer. It's super useful. I didn't even do it consciously. I just found this tray and was like, that's super cute. I bet I could put some sewing stuff on there. And in the end, it's one of like the biggest game changers in terms of like changing my habits and making my sewing a little bit more organized and smooth and clean up and that much more efficient. Highly recommend getting some sort of unit like this. Doesn't have to be the cute. This is just randomly thrifted somewhere, and giving it a shot if you struggle with things being spread out all over your workspace. Also, if you couldn't tell by the color scheme, the last thing I sewed in here was Oralyn's Sophie dress for Halloween. Oh, and one other thing that I almost forgot to mention about this table is that it is pulling double duty a little bit because it is the only place that I could find that was big enough to fit my like drafting square ruler. This was way too big for the pegboard over there. So instead I just put a cute little nail here, and now that's where this lives. It's very discreet, it blends into the wood. That's probably a key to like jamming so many crafting things into such a small space, is all these fun little personalized touches. Everything is pulling double duty. Then if we look at all the miscellaneous things I've got going on my shelf situation up here, there's not a whole lot of sewing stuff on there, but I will quickly go through some of the more relevant items because there are some very fun, cute ones in there. Also, I think I'm gonna have to stand on the stool for this one. Okay, never mind that. We're actually standing on the table. So if anyone's worrying about how sturdy it is, it's quite sturdy. So starting out here, I've got the bright orange thing is actually a grommet press. I use that when I do my leather boots, but on the channel, I usually do it by hand just because I know that a grommet press is not something that most people have in their sewing stash. So, but I do use that when I do boots because when I do boots, I have to do a lot of grommets and it's really handy. Then moving over here, I've got my collection of books. So these two very fun books, Muscle on Wheels. Highly recommend that one. The writing is actually not great, but her story is so interesting that it's totally worth it. And then also Fancy Cycling, which is super fun. It's like an old guide to various tricks you can teach yourself on cycling. So I thought it would be really fun to make a cycling suit and then teach myself some of the tricks from this book. Then here I've got some various sewing and knitting books. So here's just a general knitting book. I've got the Keystone Guide, the printed version, the Victorian Tailor, which was a gift from my patrons, which was so appreciated and has been so interesting to read through. And then a tailoring book by Singer. My mother has this book and I highly recommend it. It is very interesting and straightforward, and I'll try to put some information on it in the description if anyone else is interested in it. Then this guy has some miscellaneous little buttons and doodads in it. This is just a buttonhole attachment from, judging by the aesthetic, sometime in the 50s or 60s. Now theoretically that would go on the machine that I've got over there, but have yet to test it. Then the rest of this is just purely aesthetic. Some books from Denmark that were just, you know, very cute. This little hat box, which looks like a hat. Some of you might recognize this from my World War II knitting video. The one thing that's on here that might interest people is this little guy right here, which is a razor. It's a teeny tiny little razor. It's absolutely adorable. I found it in the garbage in Copenhagen and had to hold on to it. And obviously easy enough to transport in my luggage, so that one lives up here. Obviously I don't use it, but very cool little antique. And then over here, many of you will recognize my sewing bird, an actual antique sewing bird, which I refinished the velvet on here and also on here because the original velvet was completely trashed. And then this is also, sorry mom, I stole your thimble, but has a good home. He lives on my bird. One thing that I am kind of bummed out about the sewing table is because the tabletop is made from Ikea doors, they're very, very thick, and they're actually too thick to use my little sewing bird on. So if we take a look at the piece of wood that it's currently clamped onto, and also how thick the mouth of the clamp is, like the maximum height it can open to, there's no way that it can fit onto my sewing table. So I mean, I wouldn't change the table because honestly I love the way that it is and it was so practical, but it is kind of a shame that I don't get to use this as much as I had planned when I first purchased it. Now I can use it. I do have other tables in the house that I can go out and use it on, and I do hand sew quite a bit, as many of you are aware. So I do use it occasionally, but also, like, the other rooms in the house are not as nice. Usually the light is really bad, and there's also, I live with 3 other people, so there's roommates constantly walking in and out. So I don't use it on camera a lot. I don't use it as much as I would like to, but it does still occasionally get some use, and I quite enjoy it. It was a super fun little video about finding it and fixing it up. The one thing that is left is there is, over here, we've got, you occasionally will see the mirror in the background of my videos, and it's not just a mirror, it's like a very small closet. So that's where I keep all of my clothes. You don't need to look at my clothes, but there is one sewing related item in the closet. So let's go check it out. All right, so if we take a look, here's the closet. It is a very small closet. This is where all of my clothes live. Fortunately, I don't have that many clothes, but this is where I store some of my hanging patterns. So if I turn you around here, you can see that against the very back wall is where I've got a lot of my patterns hanging up on these pattern hooks. There's actually a pretty funny story about these pattern hooks. I got them secondhand on Marketplace, and when I went to pick them up, I discovered that the woman who was selling them actually works for the Montreal Opera. So that was really fun. We talked sewing and costuming for a little while, and it was really nice to meet somebody else in the city who is into sewing and such. So that's where they came from. They actually live in one of the drawers of my sewing machine table. So every time that I finish a pattern, I look at it and I think, okay, do I want to fold this back up and put it back in the envelope that I had stored it in? Or would it be better if it was hanging up? And most of the time, if it's a big pattern, I often end up hanging it up. So I just grab a hook from the table and put a few holes in the pattern pieces and hang them up over here. And I do find it's actually a pretty convenient storage solution. And I do find it quite nice to not have to smush my carefully assembled PDF patterns back into a small envelope most of the time. I almost forgot, guys. There is one other relevant area of this closet to what we're talking about today, and that is all the way up there, those 2 Tupperwares actually have crafting stuff in them. As you can see, oh, what is happening to my voice? As you can see, I really have taken this all the way up to the ceiling to try to jam all my crafting stuff in there. So one of those Tupperware bins holds my knitting supplies, because I do have some knitting supplies, and the other one has a bunch of t-shirts that I'm collecting for a t-shirt quilt. I've already done a few of them, not on the channel or anything. I did them before t-shirt quilts were cool, but now I'm collecting a bunch of shirts for another t-shirt quilt, so they are stored up there alongside my knitting supplies. So almost forgot to add that into the video. But with that, that pretty much wraps up all of the relevant sewing spaces in here. The only thing I didn't touch on is that corner directly behind you, but as you can see, there's nothing interesting there. It's just a boring corner with some studio lighting. I have crammed a ton of storage into here, so let me know if you have either some ideas for how I could improve it and be even more efficient about it, or, and this is the option that I like the most, is if you found something in this room that you really liked and that you are taking inspiration from and maybe modifying your own sewing space to reflect it, because I always love hearing about how you guys maybe draw some sort of inspiration from my videos and apply that, and it's just really fun to think that something that I'm doing and the videos that I'm making are actually influencing real people out in the real world. Sometimes I sit here behind my camera and despair that I'm, just making videos by myself. So I do really love hearing about how y'all are making amazing garments and creating really fun objects, inspired at least in part by my videos. So feel free, if you found something in here, specifically the pegboard, because that's obviously the coolest part of the room, that you feel like you want to try and carry over into your own sewing space, be sure to let me know down in the comments if you got any questions about how I did it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye!